everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to Empower Your Leadership Team, Distributed Systems Maturity for Leadership Practice. I'm your moderator, Kim Harris, and there's just a few reminders before we get started. If you have questions for the presenter, please be sure to place them in the Q&A box located within the Engage tab. Allow me to introduce your presenter, James Mills. James serves as the Executive Director of Turnaround Schools with LSI and is passionate about school improvement and growing leaders. Let's give a thumbs up emoji for your presenter today, James Mills.
Right. Thank you so much, Kim. I appreciate the introduction. I'd also like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. Before we get started with today's presentation, I do want to share a little personal story as to why this particular presentation is deeply, deeply personal for me. My first principal assignment was at a 6 through 12 combination school here in the state of Florida. It's a school that for the prior 8 years had either scored a D or F on the state's accountability system, and was a school that I actually had two cousins who attended the school. So not only were there some important pieces, for me, I knew that I was going to be facing a challenge. There was also some implications there of family members. And I tell the story, and I want everyone to really, to understand this piece, that if you're in leadership, whether it's a principal, an assistant principal, a district leader, a superintendent, a teacher leader, PLC leader, whatever level it is, the presentation you're going to see today is really going to take the burden of what you sometimes feel as a leader. That first year as a principal, it took everything I could just to make it through each day because I wanted everything to be absolutely perfect. I wanted it to be perfect for the students that I had been trusted to make sure that they received a high quality education. I wanted it to be perfect for the families who sent their children to school every single day. I wanted it to be perfect for the teachers that I was entrusted to cultivate and to support and to grow. Even for me inside, I wanted to be as supportive as I could for my instructional coaches, my assistant principals. And so I took everything that I did on every single day on a very personal level. And that if there was something that was not up to what I had internalized as where I wanted it to be, I took it back from an individual. So if, for example, if I were to give it to, say, my reading coach and say, here, I need you to go and do this, if it wasn't up to my expectations, I would take it back. And that first year was incredibly difficult for me. I learned a lot. We had some wonderful successes. But I'll be very honest with you, that year almost killed me as an individual. And I say that in a very literal sense because I know I'm not the only one in that situation. I talk to colleagues throughout the entire country when we visit school systems, when we visit districts. We see the challenges that leaders face right now, whether it be school accountability systems that are overly onerous, that don't support the idea that it takes more than 1 or 2 years to turn around a true low-performing school. And so I encourage you today to view this presentation as a lens to really a pathway. When we talk about reimagining schools, the pieces we look at today truly are an avenue by which to do so. And they touch every aspect, whether it's operations. Today we'll focus specifically on academics. But any aspect of a school's operations can be applied to the model we're going to look at today. And so as we jump into the system piece, I do encourage you, as Kim mentioned, if you have questions, please, by all means, place them in the Q&A section. Our learning targets for today definitely revolve around being able to apply the concept of a distributed systems maturity to strengthen instructional leadership. And that truly is beyond just the principal. It's everyone who serves as a leader on a school campus. And one of the primary resources we're going to look at today really is the action board. What is an action board and how can we use it to support the growth of the school leadership team? Just so that leadership and true efforts on a campus don't fall to 1 or 2 individuals, but are spread across the entire campus. Before we jump into that, though, I'd like to kind of capture a poll question. So we're going to open it up. How many times have you given a responsibility to someone on your school leadership team and had to take it back to do it yourself? Never, a few times, quite a bit, or more than I can remember?
They're coming in, James.
All right. I wonder if it's going to be like my first year. What are we seeing?
We're seeing more than 61% at a few times.
Okay. All right.
And bringing up the rear with that is quite a bit.
All right. Well, that's okay. That's basically what we do here is we travel the entire country and work with leadership teams. So again, guys, I really appreciate you, taking the time to answer our poll question. So let's jump into the crux of our presentation for today. So basically, in terms of distributed leadership practices, when they're done effectively, we really do see a deburden of the leader. The principal, or he or she's not the only one who has to undertake, processes on the school campus. What ends up happening inevitably when we have these effective pieces in place is we create team capacity to achieve difficult goals. We're no longer having to rely on that Superman piece or the hero leader to come in and truly affect impactful change across campus. We also see a pipeline that's developed for leadership, and we know as more and more individuals are leaving the education profession, especially at the administrative level as well, that creating that pipeline, building those individuals from within is going to be incredibly, incredibly important as we move forward. And one of the pieces, and again, after my first year, one of the things when I began to embrace this model was it really did allow the leader to take on new challenges. There's so many things that principals are faced with on a daily basis, and having a piece like a distributed leadership model allows the leader to really dig in, whether that's working with another grade level, whether that's working with a specific subject area to really hone in some pieces, or adding even more value for extracurriculars. It allows that individual to really get deeper into those items. On the other side, though, we do have what are considered to be ineffective distributed leadership practices. And some of these you've probably seen before. The leader does not free up the ownership mindshare. So what ends up happening is you may have a principal that goes home extremely tired and worn out at the end of each day. And honestly, that's due to the reluctance of the leader to hand those pieces off. And so what we end up seeing really is when a handoff does occur, it ends in poor results because those steps that we're going to look at shortly are not present. And finally, inevitably, and something that I can really speak to in my personal life, as well as some of the other leadership coaches I've had the opportunity to work with, and with principals specifically the last 2 years, is the leader will take back responsibilities to him or herself. This oftentimes results in principals who are at the school from sun up to sundown, and really don't have the opportunity to rest and to regenerate and to do some of the effectual pieces that need to happen to continue moving a school forward, regardless of where it happens to be at the current time. So let's first talk about what the system looks like from the very bottom all the way up to the top. And so in quite a few schools that we work with, we typically at some point in time, we'll find a leader that does the actions him or herself. And in this case, we'll use the example throughout the entire piece, and we'll use the PLC example. And so what you would see here is a principal that attends all the PLCs himself or herself and does all of that work to make sure that teachers are embracing those pieces. When that happens, there is no distribution on the rest of the team. Now, whether that team is another AP, 4 or 5 APs, a reading coach, a math coach, district supports, you really end up having leadership effects from that one individual rather than system effects. And again, I would challenge you to, as we go through each of these items, to look at the emphasis on the system and how the system will create the changes rather than the actual leader himself or herself. What we then typically will see and work with leaders on is we could see, honestly, the distribution of tasks without responsibility. So, for example, it could be a principal saying, go ahead and attend the ELA PLCs each week. And in this case, the AP or the instructional coach, they're just attending the session. You don't really see any emphasis on ownership unless that's truly an internal part by that individual. Here, you might get some moderate reliability for results just for the fact of having that other individual present. But again, there is a very high risk of failure to attain the system performance goals that are in here. And that honestly comes from that lack of ownership and responsibility there. Pardon me. The next piece deals with responsibility and leaving the tasks to the person responsible. It's almost like giving the means versus the ends. You can give me the ends or you can give me the means, but don't give me both, because otherwise then you truly are micromanaging, well, what I'm trying to do. And so what you tend to see here is then there's an opportunity that's birthed for ownership. Again, this one is the least reliable for results because there's not really, the desired outcome that's expressed. So if you're asking an AP or a reading coach to attend an ELA PLC, what's the purpose? Why? What do you want to see improve as a result of that? And again, we do see the highest risk of failure here because it's very ambiguous, very nebulous what the expectation is that happens. And so as you continue going up, you truly do build on these pieces. And so the leader really does have to communicate what needs to happen. So what is the task that you want to have done? And then having that discussion with the individual to say, okay, what does this really need to look like? What do we want the outcome to be? And if we don't have that definition, that conversation between the leader and the individual who's responsible for implementing it, again, just a reminder, we get the highest risk of failure. And when it doesn't go the way we need it to go, it really does fall back on the leader to implement this piece. And that's a never-ending cycle. And I will say in a large majority of schools where we work as an organization, this is what we see when we walk in the door. And that's okay, but we can't stay there. And that's the whole idea behind where we as an organization will go in and coach leaders around this particular piece. The benefit of having a presentation like this is, and again, I would encourage you, ask yourself as we're going through, where am I as a leader right now? Where is my school? Where is my district in terms of moving through this particular continuum? How do we get even better? So possibly, and then where we encourage everybody to jump in, is give a responsibility and then provide a goal. So in the example we're using in the PLC, it might be AP. When we've had the discussion back and forth, AP would attend the ELA PLCs with a goal for ensuring that students have access to targets and tasks that are aligned with each other at the rigor of the particular standard. We call that target task alignment. Very basic piece, very easy piece. Where we first start with PLCs is that AP, that reading coach, is working very closely with that PLC to ensure that lesson plans and activities are being developed that are specific to the standard, also at the level of rigor of intensity for that standard as well. When this takes place, just by adding a goal for the attendance and the task and the responsibility for that individual, we now see increased ownership. Okay, there's still not very much reliability for results there because there's that part is missing. And there's also still a high risk of failure to attain system performance because there are some elements that are missing. What elements missing? The metric. The metric is the overwhelming piece that we have to measure. If we don't have a way to measure the effectiveness of what we're doing, and again, this is not a full all-out walk that you're doing, a comprehensive walk that might take 45 minutes to an hour. It's adding a metric. For example, in the case of LSI, we offer the LSI Rigor Walk. We pull a specific element dealing with target task alignment on there, and as we walk into a classroom, within a good 5 to 7 minutes, we can tell if students are not engaged in a task that's aligned to the learning target. It could be somewhat, or it could be all the way. And again, that's a very quick metric. Even without something like the LSI Rigor Walk, though, you could design just a simple index card and walk in. Is this what we're looking for? Just one element. And again, that really does increase the ownership that we're looking at because there's a metric, a way we're going to measure it. Again, we still have low reliability for results because there's another piece that's missing, and we'll look at that in just a moment. But we move from a high risk of failure to really a moderate risk of failure to attain system performance goals just by adding the metric, because something like the metric is very visible for everyone to see and measure against. Pardon me. And so now you'll notice that in addition to the responsibility, in addition to the metric and the goal for improvement, we've actually added a documented process. And again, that process has been designed with the individual who's been given the task. And so if the process in this case of attending the PLC is you're supporting teachers, teacher leaders in developing lesson plans that have tasks that are aligned to the intent of the standard within the learning target, Now you have a documented process that said these are the pieces that'll take place. We'll review the lesson plans. We'll go through. We'll talk about the tasks. We'll make sure everyone agrees that that's truly meeting those standards. At this point, it doesn't matter who's given the task or the responsibility. The documented process is there. Again, it's a system. It's not dependent on a specific individual. It's specifically contingent upon the process. Here, what we see are the opportunity of results with high ownership, because now you have something to follow. We see moderate reliability of results because, again, there's another part missing, and we'll look at it in just a moment. And then we also still, at this point, experience moderate risk of failure to attain system performance goals. And again, we're looking at a system piece, not a specific teacher's classroom, not a specific grade level, but you're looking for a system performance goal, which would be the entire school. So as we move beyond those pieces, and what we truly want to arrive at is where we see we now have a responsibility. We have the metric that we discussed. We have a goal for improvement. And in this case, the documented process is already in place. We have to add regular leadership inspection and also feedback on the progress to the goal. So just the leader, whether it be the principal, the director, coming in and saying, what is this looking like? What results are you seeing as a result of your participation in the PLCs with this information? And then feedback on the progress toward the goal. So if the goal was, by doing this, at the end of, say, the first 9 weeks, we would experience X number of students or X percentage of students actually exiting ELA interventions. Or we might see X percentage of students showing as a learning gain after the first 9 weeks based on their baseline assessments. It's those types of goals which need to be in place and which you're getting consistent feedback on to truly make sure that those are happening. Those conversations there, and this is the part that I had to wrap my hand around at the very beginning, is although there's more items at the very top and it looks like it's more of a micromanaging piece, it's truly not, because it's allowing for a system to really generate the results rather than an individual. And so here we see, again, the most reliable results that we could obtain, and also the lowest risk of failure because of all the supports that are in place. If you think about not only the responsibility, not only the metric, but now you also have leadership inspection. So it's not go and do this and then we'll actually see if the results happen at the end of the year. You're getting a consistent feedback loop on that, and we'll talk about what that loop looks like in just a moment. So again, here, just a quick summary of where we are. Again, this is a continuum from the least amount of the benefit of everything returning back to the leader up to truly the highest opportunities we see. And so in here, with these first two elements, we typically always see the leader maintaining responsibility. And again, here, even with I need you to go in and supervise PLCs or participate in PLCs to an AP or to a reading coach, they still have the most points of failure in here because we lack those other pieces. And again, this really does not do justice if we're talking about cultivating potential leaders to really supporting the individuals we've placed in assistant principal roles or leadership roles such as a reading coach or a teacher leader. This really doesn't set them up for success. And what we want to do is cultivate individuals who have taken on these roles as much as possible to ensure that they're successful. By adding these pieces in place, we really do see the least points of failure in here, and you also see an empowering for success. One of the pieces that I experienced as a school leadership coach here in LSI a couple of years back was just by putting these pieces in place, the leadership team became a learning opportunity where people were not afraid to fail. And I just can't stress how important that is, because everyone tends to own it. When you see all of those elements, the responsibility, the metric, the goal for improvement, a process, regular leadership, and feedback on it, there's nothing nebulous there. There's not a I got you type of piece. There's not a am I doing the right thing? Everything is there, and it's a constant loop where individuals are able to say, hey, I'm doing this, but I'm not getting the results I need. Okay, well, let's work on this together as a team to figure out if that's what we need to do. And so what I'd like to ask everyone to do at this point is really think about, where are you currently in your distributed leadership practices, whether you're at the district level, the school level. Think about where you would be on the continuum. And I want to go ahead and let's do a second poll question here. And where would you plot your distributed leadership practices? I'm doing almost everything. I distribute tasks to the person responsible. I distribute the responsibility for tasks along with a metric and a goal for improvement. I distribute responsibilities for tasks along with a metric, goal for improvement, and documented process. Or I distribute responsibilities for tasks along with a metric, goal for improvement, documented process, regular leadership inspection, and feedback on the progress to the goal. Let's take a few moments.
Polls are coming in.
All right.
And already, James, we're seeing more than 50% are selecting that they distribute tasks to the person responsible. But now as more come in, we're starting to see distributing responsibilities for those tasks are coming in at 27%.
Okay. Let's give it a few more seconds to get in there. Okay, Kim, where did we finish up for the top spot?
Our top spot from that last poll, James, was that 62% was a few times. 28% was quite a bit. 8% was more than I can remember, and 2% was never.
Okay. Right.
And now as we're looking, we're almost about at 52% where they're distributing those tasks to the person responsible.
Okay. All right. So if we think about that in terms of the continuum, if we go back and look here, that really does fall down here where the leader tends to maintain the most responsibility. And again, we're least set up for success, and we have the opportunity for the most points of failure. And so I am so excited to share this next portion because this is something that I only wish I could have had as an assistant principal and a principal that first year as I transitioned into that role that I had, because it really would have given me a way to organize everything. And that really is the school leadership team action board process. What you'll see here is a very rudimentary action board. It's a 1-week board, and that's the concept behind the school leadership team action board. And you'll see to do, doing, and done. And again, I want to, even though you see that list that says, that column that says to do, this is not a to-do list. So let's think back to the example we talked about with the PLC. Part of the to-do item on there would not be, for example, create PLCs or attend PLC meeting on Tuesday. That's a to-do list. One of the, and then we'll look at a couple of examples in just a moment, to really writing what is a solid action step with a definition of done. And so what we do when we work with school leaders across the country is we set these action boards up as a part of our partnerships that we're in. And we talk about who owns the action board. And so from LSI's vantage point on here, this truly is the principal owns this board, but this guides the work of the school leadership team, specifically on improving instruction and core instruction most precisely. Now, if you happen to be in a school where conditions are preventing some of the core instruction from taking place, you may end up having conditions pieces that are on here as well as core instruction. So I say that because it's been my experience as being a principal who has worked overwhelmingly in school turnaround situations where both of those have to be addressed, the conditions for learning as well as what does core instruction look like. And so what you'll notice here is there are, we could basically would consider that action steps not only are what you're asking to be done, but they have to have a definition of done. How do I know when this is being accomplished? So it's not the person who grabs it, moves it into doing. That same person doesn't get to say when it's done. And we'll look at just a moment how that works. And so what we'll do as we decide what pieces need to be done, we'll move it across. So each week we may move something on a Monday out of the to-do column with the doing so that everybody knows that it's actually working. That individual's name would need to be on there. They're the owner of that Post-it note or that sticky note, however you decide to set it up. A lot of times we get questions about, well, why don't we just do this electronically? And that's great. After all, this conference is talking a lot about what do we do virtually and electronically. But the power of placing this in front of your staff, for them to see this, to see what the leadership team is doing. As a teacher, I think back to my first 5 or 6 years teaching, wondering, what does my principal do? What does my assistant principal do? Because I saw them a few times when it was time for evaluation, but I didn't really know everything that they were doing. And so oftentimes we'd end up in the teacher's lounge, or we'd end up having those conversations out in the parking lot, complaining about things that we truly knew nothing about. And so I would encourage leadership teams, if you're attending this together, to make your work visible to your entire faculty. Let them see what the leadership team is doing on a weekly basis to truly improve instruction and equity for the students who are a part of that school. This is really, really powerful. So if you have a collaboration room, if you have a hallway where teachers pass by, if it's a teacher sign-in room, it's really, really a good idea to place this in a high traffic area to where everyone can see the work that's taking place. And as you'll notice, typically what happens here is after that week, because again, this is a 1-week sprint. We want to make sure that what we put up here we can actually get done. We walk classrooms for the evidence of done. Taking someone's word to say, hey, this is done, that's not allowable. It's really not, because again, that goes back to it being contingent on an individual. We want to actually see what's the impact of this in an actual classroom. So we have to walk classrooms, and that's always done by the principal to inspect the work that's happened. When we talk about being an instructional leader, that's truly what this does. This forces, especially administrators who are still focused very heavily on the operational side or administrative side, to get more in the dirt or in the weeds, so to speak, when we're working toward improving core instruction. And again, if we walk classrooms and we do not see evidence that it's done, it goes back to do, and we pick it back up next week. And so what I'd like to do is kind of share with you just what a basic action step and definition of done would be. So in this example, there are actually 2 action steps for the reading coach, and then we'll see what the definition of done is. Jessica Miller, who's the reading coach, will attend and participate in grade 4 ELA PLCs on Monday and Wednesday. So we've got the task, okay, and what's the goal? Focusing on target task alignment. Very narrow, very specific approach, not completing lesson plans, not talking about the field trips this week, not planning when we're going to do for picture day or eye exams, dental work. It's all focusing on target task alignment. That's the work of those PLCs for this week. She's also going to conduct one look and learn for each grade 4 ELA teacher and submit feedback on target task alignment in the LSI Growth Tracker. Now, you're probably asking, well, what is a look and learn? A look and learn is where that reading coach or any individual would go in and actually look specifically for implementation of professional learning. And so if there's been coaching or there's been professional development around, in this case, target task alignment, Jessica in this example is going in to look to see where the teacher is in implementing what was planned inside the PLC. That's the whole concept behind the loop. And that loop is very important, that teachers are getting growth feedback, not evaluative feedback. And I can't stress that enough. It has to be feedback around the growth of the professional learning that they've put in place. And what you'll see here is she's providing feedback to that teacher specifically on target task alignment, and she's documenting it through the LSI Growth Tracker. So if you think back to the whole documenting of a process piece, that's just an example of documenting that process. What's our definition of done for those 2 action steps? In this example, Jocelyn Waiters, who is the principal, will visit 5 classrooms. And again, this has taken place at the end of the week once that item has been moved to done. And she's looking to see that in 4 out of 5 classrooms, the observed learning target and task will be aligned at the appropriate taxonomy or higher as measured by the LSI Rigor Walk during the ELA block. So notice here you have a metric that's also been introduced to this whole process. We're looking specifically at the learning target and the task aligned to the appropriate taxonomy or higher, and it's during the ELA block. Very specific. We can see that if we walk into a classroom. If we walk into 5 of those ELA classrooms, we can see it. It's either there or it's not there. And we do recommend that, of course, you give yourself a little bit of leeway. For example, this specific example, let's say you were trying it for the first week, It might be 2 out of 5 classrooms. It might be 3 out of 5. Depending on where you are in this specific aspect, that's where you would set your goals. We do encourage you to set ambitious goals, but also realistic goals and targets that can help build the process. Because what we do typically see is we see leadership teams who get started very quickly with an action board. And let's say at the end of the week, of all the items we move to the done category, we walk classrooms, none of them met our target. It gets very disheartening, things like that. So we want to really think about what can we do to experience success very early on with the school leadership team action board process. And notice that this is not just the work of a principal. In this case, it also includes the reading coach. Evidence of ownership and distribution already. You have 2 individuals who are involved here. Now, in the typical action board, the AP or each AP would also have either 1 action step or multiple action steps in a week. Beyond 2, we experience diminishing returns. So again, I would encourage you, definitely an action step, 1 action step for each member of the school leadership team, but no more than 2 a week so that they can truly focus on that specific aspect. And again, this is not the only work that reading coach is doing this week, but this is the most important work to us moving us to that goal of getting more students on grade level by the end of the school year, or in this case, by the end of the first 9 weeks. So let's look at a little bit at how action boards can expand once you move from the standard to do, doing, and done. And, oh, well, that's a nice one. Nice animation there. Break it up a little bit. All right, so in the SLT action board process, you really do want to look into your ready list. And so if you've set a 45-day goal here, you do see 1-week chunks. So maybe you say, yes, we're going to focus on this week, but what do we want to be doing for the next 4 to 5 weeks? Because again, having that vision is going to be absolutely critical. If we know we need to increase our proficiency rate in ELA, 4-5 percentage points overall for the school, what do we need to be doing each week to help us get there? And so really taking those ready list items and saying, what does the principal need to do this week? What does each AP need to do this week? What does the reading coach need to do this week? Creating those action steps and definitions of done so they can very quickly move. Now what you'll notice is you typically want to put your higher priority items at the top. And again, you only see purple Post-its on the presentation for this purpose, but I'd also encourage you that if you're going to take this on, that each individual have their own color of Post-it note so that you can very quickly see who is responsible for what and where they are in terms of that support. And what we would do is we would also rank the lower priority items further down below. That can change at any time. Just because we ranked 1 lower priority this week doesn't mean that it becomes the top priority next week. Every school, every grade level, every subject area is going to change on a weekly basis. Anyone who's been inside a school any length of time will tell you anything we planned this week might not be what actually happens next week. And so you're constantly working with your team. It's not the principal always setting the priorities every week. It's the team looking at what did we get done? Where are we moving? Let's do this together. Think about that. Think about what that looks like in terms of ownership week after week after week. You begin having everyone else carry some of that burden, carry some of that load. And again, just by making the work of the leadership team visible through the action board. Again, we mentioned that as pieces are ready to come off, it might be on a Friday. You might move your to-do list to Monday, and let's see who picks it up on Monday. All of this is really contingent upon making sure that you have a 45-day goal in place. We mentioned the 45-day goal earlier about increasing the number of students who exited intervention after the first 9 weeks. Again, comparing their baseline data to what we would do for our progress monitoring after the first 9 weeks. It could also be, we're looking at, proficiency. Maybe we are going to measure proficiency each 9 weeks using MAP scores or iReady scores or Achieve 3000. Whatever adopted piece you have, you can implement it. And notice that when you include those items, those pieces, you're showing that that's actually something that's important. Teachers, that whole team, they see, everyone on the staff sees how important it is now that the data we get back is relevant. It actually means something. It's not just something we put together to send a report to the district office or for the district to send up to the state. It actually means something. We're going to do something with this data. But again, make sure your goals are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. Those, of course, are our SMART goals. I mentioned earlier about one of the examples with conditions. If let's say you have a school where you're working on conditions, one of those examples might be reducing behavior calls and referrals by half when comparing prior year data to current year data. And that's realistic. You've got other people who might be included on the team. Maybe your school psychologist is a part of that. Maybe your social worker, maybe your guidance counselor, your behavior team. And use actual data. Put the data up from last year so that everyone can see. A lot of times people use, I feel this is what we're doing. I feel like we're moving in the right direction. This process, it honestly takes the feeling out and it puts the real in. And when you have the real in, you get real feelings. That to me is really, really powerful and something that I was able to truly experience my last 2 years as a principal by just getting out of that whole I feel to, what are we seeing? What's the real piece there? Some other examples you might consider for some of your academic goals. If we're looking at math, 30% of students in the math lowest quartile, if we're comparing prior year state data, will score in the next highest bucket based on interim math map data. Anything you can do to connect where you want to be at the end of the year to where you want to be at the end of the first 45 days is really, really powerful. It helps you to be able to celebrate your successes and also to not use hope as a strategy. Because that again, we know that does not work when it comes to student academic performance. As we move, pardon me, and again, just like we did on the ready list, I would encourage you to have your higher priority items at the top, which is lower priority items at the bottom. And again, it's always very helpful that as you're writing action steps, that you go ahead and at least make an effort for the definition of done. You may change your action step as you're approaching each week, and you more than likely will change your definition of done, because one thing that I learned very, very early on in this, once you begin this process, your expectations become exponentially higher each week as you go through this. So whereas the definition of done at the end of 1 week would have been in 6 out of 10 classrooms, your expectation next week is that my entire school, if I'm going into all 20 rooms to inspect this, or 30 rooms, 40 rooms, whatever you have, you may say, no, I really want to see this in 95% of my classrooms. That expectation will be incrementally higher because it's visible to everyone on your team. And again, as we move items out of the priority list or out of the 45 day or our parking lot into the ready list, then they would again just jump right on over to the to-do list to be picked up by someone next week. Now, you'll notice that I've added another metric to the screen. In this case is LSI's rigor diagnostic, which is typically administered quarterly and really gives us an idea of where the school is in moving toward rigor through core instruction. Measures conditions, measures student academic teaming, students working in groups using data as is an entire school, and really is aligned to outcome measures on state assessments. And that measure is very, very tight. As an organization, we now have correlational studies in the states where we work that link the rigor diagnostic to end of year outcomes on state assessments. Unfortunately, this year we didn't have an opportunity to do that because the statewide assessment was disrupted, but we do have that data from prior years. Let's say in this case, this one's tied to the rigor diagnostic. Let's say you didn't have a metric like that. Maybe your metric is MAP. Maybe your metric is iReady. Whatever the metric is that you have, it's critical that you have something that you're monitoring throughout the year, not creating something that's new. You could even use something that you already have in place. The important part here, and the part that I want to make sure that I don't skip over, is that your action steps, your definitions of done, should all be working toward improving whatever that metric is. And that's vitally, vitally important there. Now, what you'll notice as we move forward is this board, and honestly, it can all be put up on one wall. I mean, you will really see different pieces. It'll evolve over time. And so what you start off with, I can almost promise you won't end up with. It will look different after the first 9 weeks. It'll definitely look different at the mid-year. And it will look tremendously different by the end of the year, because in education, we're always innovating. And so you'll find things, you'll see teachers who come in and say, well, you know what if we start adding some student pictures to this portion over here? Or, what if we added another data element here? Or you may have, after the first 9 weeks, a group of PLC leaders, teachers that have stepped up and said, hey, we want to take this on. We really see that you guys are working on this. We want to be a part of it. And so what you'll see at the bottom really is a cycle. And this cycle looks at, in this case, a 45-day cycle. And you'll see the bookends here, as I mentioned before, rigor diagnostic as a baseline, and then another rigor diagnostic as a check. Again, in our case, when we work with our partners throughout the country, we do these quarterly. And then you'll notice that in the middle, there are another metric we use, which is basically on a weekly basis, and that's the rigor walk. That's a smaller subset of the rigor diagnostic. And in this case, if you think back to the example we used, we were only looking at one element within the rigor walk. So whereas we may go in and collect data on all 10 to 12 elements of the rigor walk, we really, for the example we used earlier, we really only are focusing on that one element for our definition of done. And so what you'll notice is each week has its own action board. Week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5, and week 6. And we do that on purpose because you're trying to focus on bits and pieces. What can we accomplish in that 1 week? Now, inevitably, something that gets to done, as I mentioned before, will have to go back to do. You can't stop your action board every week. The chances that everyone is not able to get to the definition of done, it happens. It happens. And so being prepared to say, okay, we didn't get it this week, we're all going to do it next week, but it truly does set the stage to say, oh no, this is not just a week to week. We can't get bogged down. We do have another piece that we have to measure at the end of this 9 weeks. And so that's where truly having those checks gives you an idea of where you are on the way toward achieving that 45-day goal. Now you'll notice again, there inevitably will be, okay, so we're not just doing 45 days. We got an entire school year. We add a needs parking lot outside the 45-day cycle. We're thinking about those really, really strong, powerful pieces. And so we do encourage leadership teams to think about, what's outside it. What we'll do is we'll say, okay, so some of the goals that you planned inside your school improvement plan, where would they fall in here? Where would they fall? Because we do need to consider whether we need to add some additional members to the leadership team, or if we need to focus, maybe we're approaching meeting our first goal and we need to change the focus on another aspect. Having an idea of what it needs to look like for the entire school year is very helpful. I would not encourage doing all this at the same time. This is something that generally happens toward the middle of that first 45-day cycle, is really stepping back and saying, okay, as a process, as a system, how is this working? And then being able to say, okay, what do we know some of our needs are going to be coming up into the second grading period, second 9 weeks. If you're on trimesters, the second trimester, however that breaks out. And so what you'll notice here again is those elements are again, it's time and time and time again. They continue repeating. You always are driving toward, what does this look like? Again, this could be your setup for your second 9 weeks. This could be your setup for your third 9 weeks and the setup for your fourth 9 weeks. Where do you want to be at each specific interval? So if your overall school goal is to raise ELA proficiency by 4 or 5% overall as a school, what do those 45-day goals need to look like? We're not going to go there in the first 9 weeks. We'd like to be there as we approach the end of the third 9 weeks, because then we're getting into statewide testing. But where do we want to be? And that's where that needs parking lot is incredibly powerful. So we have some examples of what some of the action boards are and some of the partnerships we have. And you'll see that they all have something in common, which is the to-do, doing, and done. But you also see, here's one with a goal. And you'll see ones that have action boards. And I'll call your attention to the one in the bottom right-hand corner where you see the parking lot. They've actually said, okay, we know that these are the things we've got coming up. It does not have to be pretty. Your action board will be torn, it'll be bruised, it'll be battered, it'll have coffee stains on it. It's okay. It's a living, breathing document. It's a true incantation of where we're going. And so it doesn't have to be pretty. But you'll also notice that on each of these action boards, you see a different color post-it note. And traditionally, that's been so that everyone knows who's responsible for what on there. So this action board in and of itself is not enough. There is one other resource that we need to really pay attention to, and that's the daily stand-up. The daily stand-up is absolutely critical to ensuring the success of the action board. And truly, this is just a 5 to 15-minute meeting every day. It's owned by the principal. It's in a common location, and the part that I can't emphasize enough, it's a stand-up. It's not a sit-down. If it's a sit-down, it becomes a 30, 45 hour-long meeting that can be on everything. And this is where we see operations getting pulled in. We see field trips getting pulled in. We see a lot of complaints getting pulled in. We see everybody trying to fix everybody's issue. That's not the time for this. This is the one time of the day that we hold sacred, that we ask our office staff to support us on. We ask our behavior team to support us on, to say, please, please preserve these 5 to 15 minutes for the leadership team so that we can focus on what we need to do this week to move core instruction for our students. During this time, the principal goes around and says, what did you observe yesterday that moves us toward the definition of done? And if each individual has an action step and a definition of done, they can speak to it. Okay, and that's true ownership. If you go back to where we were talking about the distributed system maturity, that's that feedback on the process. That's that regular leadership inspection. It's true leadership inspection on a daily basis, and it's amazing. You're not having to text someone 9:30, 10 o'clock at night saying, hey, did this get done? What are we doing tomorrow? It takes that away. It allows our leadership teams to get some of that personal and that family and that social life back that oftentimes in doing the work of a school can be robbed. This is really, really powerful pieces here, because yes, there's going to be parent conversations we need to have. There are going to be upset parents. There are going to be community members that want a meeting. There are going to be calls that come in about different pieces, but this is the one piece that has to remain steady and resolve if we're going to move our students forward to meeting that goal that we set for proficiency. It's not a list of everyone you saw yesterday and what you talked about or observed in the classroom. Okay. Are there any impediments to getting to our goal this week? This is a time where say, yes, but you know what? I did get a call from such and such where I had to go handle a parent call. Okay, how can we then work through that? It's a problem-solving piece. And again, notice it's not the principal solving all the problems. It's the team saying, okay, you know what? I can cover that duty for you tomorrow. Or you know what? Let's see if we can't rearrange the schedule so we can fit that so that we can get our teachers the support that they need. This is a time for gathering data. And again, this is data that's going up on the action board. And this is also where we review the day and next steps. We say, okay, how many classrooms demonstrated the definition of done? And that's the powerful piece. Are we moving on to that end? And so what I want to encourage, I know at the beginning of our session, we talked about our learning targets. These are your resources that you have right now. You can start this, and this doesn't, whether it's virtual instruction, whether it's in-person instruction, whether it's hybrid, you have the ability to use these as quick action resource tools tomorrow. This is something that you can get together as a leadership team and put it in place. And I'll tell you from a personal level, this process gave me my life back. I became an individual who loved my job again as a principal. That first year was incredibly, incredibly tough for me, personally and professionally. When I began to embrace this process and certain aspects of it, I saw growth on the leadership team. I saw ownership by teachers. I saw smiles. I saw people who weren't incredibly tired each day. Again, this is a school where the school day was extended from 7.5 hours to 9 hours. Can you imagine? We're at the school from 5:45 in the morning, leadership team, and a lot of times as a high school, we weren't leaving 11, 12. Friday night, sometimes we wouldn't be back till 1 or 2 in the morning. We didn't have to always worry about some of the other pieces because this is a process that was in place that allowed us to recapture and to focus on the work that needed to be done to ensure students' academic equity and moving forward on this. And to this day, I still say this is the main driver which allowed the schools that I've been able to work with the success that are in place. So I would encourage you, and I want to go ahead and place my contact information up here. If you want to engage in a dialogue, please call me anytime. You can send me an email. You see my phone number there. And if you'd like to just get together to talk about what this looks like in your school and how we might as an organization be able to help you, and even if it doesn't go even beyond just our meeting, if you'd like some more ideas on what this needs to look like, some feedback, please schedule some time with me. Here's my Calendly link. Got the QR code on there. I'll leave that up for just a few moments if you want to scan that. It is calendly.com/LSI-JMills. And I hope you can tell just how passionate I am about this work as we are as an organization. LSI is in this work. We truly believe that empowering leadership teams is the only way to make this a systemic growth. The days of having to find a Superman or a Superwoman to lead effectual school change it's not sustainable. We have to do something different. So I would encourage you, even if you adopt certain aspects of this, to try it. There's no risk in trying this to see if it's going to be successful. So Kim, with that being said, have we had any questions come in?
Oh, absolutely. We have so many questions on here, James. And Nikki started this question off really early on, and I'm sure this is on the hearts and minds of so many other people. But Nikki is saying that she's really trying to see how to build capacity within the building leaders so that they don't take on something themselves that should have really been something that their other teammates should have done. Can you talk a little bit about that, James?
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very real situation. And this truly is those conversations almost entirely have to originate very early on when you have an administrator, and by having a principal supervisor to be a part of this process as well, so that they understand this is something I'm trying to do to build capacity in my folks. Because right now there's such a huge pressure on principals across the nation to say, and I'll give you an example. Let's say a school earns an F. Let's just talk about Florida for a second, but this is apropos for the entire country. Typically that blame will always fall on the principal. And so what principals do in an effort to make sure that they don't fail is they internalize all that and bring that on. And so by having those honest conversations very early on from the district level to the school level, and then from a building administrator to have that conversation with their leadership team, and then for that leadership team to have that conversation in front of their staff to say, we're in this together and here's how we're going to get there. But that's beyond just the feel good part. It's actually having a process in place like this one, like the distributed system maturity with the action board and the daily stand-up, that will allow individuals oftentimes to see, hey, you know what, I might not be carrying some of the weight that I should be carrying, and then to have those honest conversations with each other.
Sure. And we have another question from Melissa. She's talking about how new principals, and we all can identify with this, are so overwhelmed. But the question becomes, how do you raise new leaders in this philosophy and the whole idea of distributed leadership practices? And sometimes they really aren't ready to share those leadership practices with others. Can you talk a little bit about that, James?
Oh yes, that's really real. I was one of those individuals that had had an assistant principal who had a strong background in ELA and a reading coach, and I thought I knew better. And I wanted to say, okay, hey, listen, this is what I need. I need you guys to do it exactly the way I would do it. And that's not so. I think, again, putting a process in place like this, we talked about what does that whole year goal look like? We don't just, and I hate to use this phrase because it's so overused, we don't pigeonhole, or we shouldn't pigeonhole our administrators into saying, you're responsible for attendance, you're responsible for curriculum, you're responsible for operations. It really is going around and looking at to say, okay, what are your strengths? And then placing people where their strengths are, but also asking them, where do you want to grow? Where do you want to really take off and, add to your toolbox and where do you need to do that? And so that's the other aspect. It's where do you want to grow, but then also where have the principal saying, these are some of the things that I'm okay with letting go, but this is what I'm going to need to have in place. And what this does, this creates a safe space for that leader who is hesitant to release those items, because that documented process is in place, that metric is in place. So it's not like the principal having to go and having a personal conversation that's saying, hey, I don't like what you're doing. It's no, are we following the process we agreed to? Are we seeing the results that we want to see through our metrics? And so that's what I would really encourage, as a first step.
Sure. And I'm glad you mentioned metrics, because there's individuals who would like you to reiterate the information about metrics, and more specifically to know what tools are being used to track metrics.
Okay, absolutely. Fantastic. And so right now, typically what you'll see if you walk into a school right now, you'll see a student data dashboard. But that's traditionally either lagging data, or it could really be, which we consider to be what we call long cycle data, or you could have progress monitoring data. You could have biweekly assessment data, which we still consider to be mid-cycle. But a metric that you would have in place, for example, like a rigor walk, you're able to collect information on a weekly basis. But let's say you didn't have access to that. It could be as simple as you picking out what that goal of improvement is and tying it to the specific aspect. So in our example, if you're just looking at target task alignment, a metric can actually be a piece of paper with the checklist on it with teachers' names or the classrooms. You can even take the names off if you wanted to, by saying, what did I see when I went in? And that's, a lot of times we're thinking the majority of the metrics we're looking at are evaluative, but in this case, it's centered around growth. So it could just be a simple metric on an index card going into a classroom and saying, was the learning target and the task that I observed students working on and working toward, was it at the standard? Was it at the level of rigor required of the standard? Yes, it was fully, just a little bit, or no, not at all. Because then what that allows you to do is then go back and have those conversations. Let's say it's a conditions piece. LS offers a conditions walk that allows you to conduct pieces on there. Your metric for, if you're working on conditions, really could be, well, what's the number of referrals that are coming in, and not just the number of referrals. What are the types that are coming in? Is it fighting? Is it eloping? Is it class disruption? Those are negative referrals, but what are positive referrals? That's another metric that you can be tracking. It's really a piece of data that team can look at on a weekly basis to see if they're making a progress toward that 45-day goal.
Great. So we also have a few questions referencing the action board, James. And the question is, if something is done, what is the process for revisiting it to make sure that it has lasting impact and not just that 1 week that it was active?
Absolutely. Great question. And I'll share two examples with you. We worked with a team that liked to burn their definitions of done each week. Said, okay, we got it done. We're going on. And that was a wonderful opportunity for celebration. But what it did is it didn't allow them to go back and see just how much they had accomplished as a team. And so what we encourage schools to do is to create a repository, what we call our success bucket, and then revisit those. If you're familiar with the Agile, the Scrum piece that software organizations use, they do retrospectives, whether that be every 2 or 3 weeks. What we encourage leadership teams to do is revisit those definitions of done each month to really see, am I still seeing this in a classroom? And here's how we know that we're on the way of doing that each quarter. Because if you think back to where we were talking about the rigor diagnostic, collecting those elements each quarter, not only are you capturing those elements through the rigor walk, those weekly pieces, you're also capturing it at the end of the quarter. All of those elements are being looked at in that area again. So I would encourage you, don't destroy your done, your definitions of done. Celebrate them. Publicize them to the staff. Mm-hmm.
James, for our last question, what are some examples that would and would not go on the action board? Can you give examples about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the, and I'll start with some non-examples. So non-example would be, send field trip participation slips home. Design bus supervision schedule. Design student seating arrangement in the cafeteria. Those are operational elements. Those are pieces that truly can be, okay, yes, it's either done or no, it's not. And so what I would encourage you to do is go back and think about elements. So if your 45-day goal is to increase the number of students who are exiting intervention. Which means that they wouldn't need to go to intervention. They would continue to receive all of their instruction from the core. It really would be around that element. So it could be tied to PLCs. It could be tied to student time with set number of teachers and what those teachers are doing. It really has to have, and the key part here that I don't want to overlook is it has to have a definition of done that's tied to something that can be measured. That's not yes or no. That you would be able to truly to look at to say yes it is, no it's not, but to what degree? What is the goal for improvement? Did we get there that week? I know we shared the example about earlier with the map. It could be this week. One of the examples definitions might be done. 40 of the 100 students that are currently intervention, X number will receive support for 3 hours on this particular topic, and then we would look to see, did that happen by the end of the week? What was the outcome of it? What needs to be done next? That's a rudimentary example there, but truly those are some ideas. We talked about the conditions piece, whereas principal, or in this case behavior team, will provide coaching in all 4th grade math classrooms. And our definition of done might be we won't see any referrals on fighting this week. Something that you can measure about it and say, because of what we did to support, this was the income, this was the end result.
Thank you. Well, that's all the time we have for now. Thank you so much, James. Thank you so much to the audience